Welcome, Augustino Ting Mayai, to RBC-TV.
Thank you very much for having me.
Really great to have you. We are here to talk about the Sudd Institute. So what is a better way to start that than ask, what is the Sudd Institute?
Thanks so much, Mohan, for having me, and glad that we are able to discuss the Sudd Institute. Two things in mind. One is to be able to educate those who are not familiar with the Sudd Institute about its roles in our society, and to also talk about the recent closure and reopening of the Institute. The Sudd Institute was founded in 2011-2012. 2011-2012, because the idea was conceived in 2011. We submitted documents for registration to the government at that time. But then finally, we finalized that process in 2012. And the Institute was founded so it would conduct and facilitate research and training to inform public policy and practice, and to create opportunities for discussion and debate, and to improve the country's analytical capacity. And as such, our intention as an institution was and still is to improve the quality, impact, and accountability of local, regional, national, and international policy and decision-making related to our country. And in all this, we want to make sure that we are promoting a more peaceful, just, and prosperous society, and that's South Sudan. Therefore, the Institute was established, and its premise was that we believe that public policy must be informed by reliable data, objective analysis, and thoughtful debate, which did not exist when we emerged in 2011-2012 in terms of spaces where policy issues would be discussed. And so the Institute was founded for these reasons.
Brilliant. Who established the Institute? Whose idea was it?
So the Institute was conceived by several individuals, but the establishment was undertaken by fewer than the initial individuals who conceived of it. Initially, when we started this debate, it was a product of a government's evaluation, which was conducted in May 2011 as part of the country's transition to statehood. The evaluation was commissioned by the Office of the President under late Dr. Priscilla Nyanyang, and we were recruited from different areas as researchers, including myself, Jok, Awolic, Zakaria Ding, and individuals from both locally and from abroad participating in this study. And the comprehensive evaluation of the government focused on what the government of Southern Sudan then achieved during the interim period, and what could be learned from that in terms of setting up a state. Based on this evaluation, we learned a great deal in terms of policy analysis deficit. And as a result, many of us sat down and thought of putting together a think tank. Many others were able to actually put in place their own think tanks, including PWR, you have John Gayo, you have Law Society, you have Ebony Center, as a result of their observation in terms of what policy looked like at the time. And so who really sat down to discuss the potential for the Institute's establishment included Dr. James Alit, who is now at the IMF. You have, in terms of conception, you have Abraham Ding Akoy, who is at the World Bank. You have Adoya Bodriak, who is now in Canada, studying there, becoming a medical doctor. You have Dengatho Galwak, who is here working at Defense. Francis Book, who is a celebrity. Job Madut, Abraham Awolic, myself, Zakaria Ding, and many others. But the actual founding in 2012 was now undertaken by James Alit, Dengato Galwak, Francis Book, Jogmadut, Awolic, Zachariah Dean, and myself.
How many people work for the Institute now, and what's the structure? How is the Institute structured in terms of governance?
So the Institute, as you know, is a research institution, and its primary activity is research. And so we are structured on the basis of what the Institute needs. And with research being its primary objective, you have support directorate. So you have directorates that are supporting the research directorate, which is the main blood of the institution. So we have research, we have administration, you have training, you have communication. And this other directorates basically support research. We have 7 core staff. As we speak, we were 8, but Abraham, as you saw, has resigned, so he's no longer part of the Institute. And then we have 6 support staff for the current period. Previously, we had more, and some actually left the Institute for other jobs. Some left for political reason. But currently, we have a total of 13 staff at the Institute.
Okay. In a separate discussion previously, you mentioned Board of Trustees. So is that also part of the structure of the Institute?
The board, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have the board, and I forgot to mention that the board is actually the governing entity of the Institute. So the decisions that are being made with respect, major decisions that are being made with respect to the Institute are endorsed by the board. If they are not endorsed by the board, then we basically don't undertake those decisions. Unlike other institutions, our institution is largely dependent on the board. So the senior management team makes decisions that are first sanctioned by the board. So the board basically is the one responsible for governance. But then the senior management and the other staff are responsible for the operational staff of the Institute.
Okay, do we know who is on the board?
So we have Dr. Pauline Ria, who is the chair of the board. Dr. Pauline was at some point, she was the founding board chair, and then became the director of the Institute when Joke Madu left, and they switched roles. Dr. Pauline now is back as the chair of the board. You have Justice Ajonye, who is a lawyer, previously an advisor, legal advisor to the president, but now runs what's called Law Society, which is also a research and advocacy institution in the country. You have Moan Bruce Ring, who is a business manager here in Juba. Is also a board member. You have Honorable Tim De Quick, who is a member of parliament. You have an individual who is not a South Sudanese, but also focused on research. His name is Brian. He's part of the board. And then you have, who is the 5th person Dr. Lebin Mor, who is professor at the University of Juba, is also a board member.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, thank you for that. How is the Sudd Institute funded?
The Institute is funded by a variety of entities. At the founding, we were supported by USIP. And the USIP stands for the United States Institute of Peace. We like to say that the USIP is the mother of the Sudd Institute, because not only did this institution provide financial resources, they also enabled us to have training in terms of management, both in South Sudan and in Washington, D.C. for about a year, to teach us basic practices of managing an institution such as the Sudd Institute. So in this case, we're talking about the USIP, which is funded by the U.S. government. So you can easily say that the U.S. government is funding us. The second entity is Coordate, which is a Catholic development and charity institution, but funded by the government of the Netherlands. Over the years, they have given us funding. You have UK funding different agencies in South Sudan. And for example, we had funding for the last 3 years to cover environment, especially climate change related issues for 3 years from 2015 to 2018. with funding coming from the UK. And then Norway has been funding us both through UNDP and directly through the embassy. We have had also funding from the Japanese government, directly and also through UNDP. We had, over the years, worked with UN agencies, UNICEF, UN Food and Agricultural Organization. You have UNDP giving us funding. And then you have Catholic Relief Services, as well as Swiss cooperation. And so you have different agencies funding the Institute, but also we do consultancies on the side in addition to this. And recently we had other funding sources, Oxford University, Cambridge University, and then overseas, Open Society also provided money for the Institute's work. So different institutions, different entities over the years.
Do you receive any funding from the government of South Sudan or from other South Sudanese entities?
No, we have not received any funding from the government. And quite honestly, let me make this clear. So if the government was to provide resources for research, we would apply for those resources. What we would not do is get the resources and have our independence encroached upon. But if the government is willing to provide resources, as it did for the National Dialogue, and pulls back from that, we are happy to receive the funding. However, given the financial circumstances of the country, the government has not been able to allocate any resources for research entities, not just the Sudd Institute, but more generally. But I want to say this. At the founding, the SPLM gave the Sudd Institute some money, equivalent of $5,000, I think. That was at the founding. But that was it. That's the furthest we went as far as anything related to the government coming to the Institute.
And the Sudd Institute was partner to the national dialogue, so you would count that as well as additional funding, right?
So the national dialogue funding went to the national dialogue funding went to the Secretariat. They did not come to the Institute. Initially, the idea was that the institution responsible for the Secretariat would get the funding because we were sending people. So Awolic and Zakaria were sent from the Institute, and then you have Ebony sending folks, University of Juba sending folks to the national dialogue. But the structure of the funding was somewhat constrained that these institutions ended up not getting the funding. And so it ended up being given to individuals that were sent by the Institute in form of incentives as well as travel, accommodation, and what have you, wherever they went. But we did not get the funding to the institutions.
Oh, brilliant. There's an issue that came up on several platforms, suggesting that the Institute is too much dominated by the Dinka and is soft on the government. Is this true?
This is inaccurate, and let me put it this way. As I said, our job as an institution, and let me put it this way. As I said, our job as an institution is policy analysis and policy advice to different entities, including the government. The government is a major player in terms of policy undertaking in the country. The next layer of policy stakeholder is the international community, which includes the UN and all these other agencies and diplomatic community. What really needs to be understood is that the idea of Dinka domination is rooted in the fact that the institution was founded by elements from the Dinka tribe. Now, let me address this a little further. Myself, Zakaria Dean, James Alich, Joke Madut, Dengatoi, Ben Machar, Adwea Bodriak, and Francis Book were the core folks coming from Dinka community, but we were brought together by
Awolic.
Not as individuals representing a community. But during the development of this idea, and I need to be clear on this, we reach out to folks from other backgrounds. And I'm going to cite a couple of examples. I don't know how much you know of Professor Isaac Gang. Professor Isaac Gang is a Nuer. he teaches in the US. Somebody we know very well in our circle. He's one of the Red Army members. Professor Gang was teaching in Texas. And it's somebody that I've worked with in the SPLM in some other areas. Job knows him well, Awolic knows him very well. We invited him to be part of the Institute. We also reach out to others to be part of this. And one of these individuals is somebody I really admire, somebody who has committed so much time since he was young to the SPLM and the cause of the people of South Sudan, Ilia Bayona. Ilia Bayona and I worked for UNICEF, but when I met him, he was working for the National Bureau of Statistics. He's an Equatorian, but somebody who is focused on issues of interest to South Sudan, and especially research in demography and statistics. We reached out to him. We also reached out to Professor Alfred Lokuji, who is a well-known political scientist, both locally and regionally, who was then a professor at the University of Juba when we conceived of the idea, and many others. Now, all of these folks were in support of the idea, but they were occupied playing other roles in the society and said, you go ahead and take the establishment of the institution, but it will support you from afar. We then went ahead and established the Institute. And soon after establishing the Institute, we were now ready to make sure that we undertake the recruitment. And our first recruitment resulted in hiring Honorable Adel Senderai. Adel Senderai was the Minister of Education in Western Equatoria before he left that post and came to Juba. And we identified him as somebody who would do a good job at the Institute, and he did. He was hired as the Director of Communication at the Sudd Institute. Unfortunately, when the war broke out, given his political activities, his life was threatened. So he left the Institute and in fact joined the IO then. Came back afterwards and wanted to be in politics, did not want to join the Institute. The next thing we did was to recruit a fellow, the first fellow of the Institute. In this case, we're trying to look at gender-related issues, gender policy in the country. And we reached out to a variety of South Sudanese. The most competent individual we found for this post was Professor Jane Edward, who is professor at Fordham University in New York and spent time with the Institute as a fellow. Her work is published and it's available on the Institute's website. And it focuses largely on gender-related policy in the country as it relates to the SPLM's 25% and many other gender-related issues, gender roles and what have you. Jane Edward became our first fellow, and non-Dinka. But then when Duke left the Institute to go to attend to a family matter in the US, we hired Professor Pauline Yak, that's a woman, to lead the Institute. Now, one can say Dr. Pauline is a Jan. She's married to an Atwip, or rather, Chich, and is somebody who is well known to South Sudanese and well known regionally, well known internationally. She's now an advisor to the UN here in South Sudan and became the chair of the Institute. And that was necessary because we were transitioning to a male leadership to a female leadership. In 2018, we hired two more people, one a Kuku and one a Nue, and they are both on the staff right now. That is to address the issue of Dinka domination. Now, let me get to the issue of the government, being soft on the government. And I want to also say that this is also inaccurate. But what I understand from this is that people are coming from a certain angle. And it makes sense to me because most South Sudanese have a limited understanding of what a think tank does. What these people expect of us is that we should be political. We're not a political institution. We're not an advocacy institution. We are an analytical institution. Our job is to analyze policies and provide advice. The government and the other stakeholders are supposed to be our partners, not our enemies. And so we have not been able to get into politics. And as a result, we are accused of being soft on the government. But what people don't see is that in terms of analysis, we have actually been very critical, both of the government and the other entities operating in South Sudan. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Professor Jane Edward wrote a paper on gender policy gaps in the country and made it clear that the policy, the 25% policy, was not being implemented. And that something should be done. Now, that is not necessarily attacking any political entity, but more of a policy. And the policy in this case is looking at a bigger level. We're looking at the parliament, which passes the laws. We're looking at the executive, which basically implements those laws and policies. We're looking at other entities that are responsible for governance within the country. And so gender policy analysis was to cater to all these individual entities and components of the government by challenging them that they should do right by this policy. That's number one. Number two, Awolic recently wrote a policy brief on the implementation of the agreement and clearly showed that the agreement was lacking in so many fronts. That is the challenge to the parties of the agreement. And in this case, we're looking at the government. Ting Mayai, myself, and others have written on several issues. The more recent one, we're looking at local content. And local content in the oil sector is to figure out what benefits South Sudan is accrue from this oil exploitation. And we're looking in particular at employment. And in employment, we wanted to compare South Sudanese with the foreigners. And we zero in on the benefits that are accruing to different components within the oil sector. And we look at the salaries, and we found clearly that South Sudanese were underperforming in terms of benefits. For example, we showed clearly that the foreigners are making $30,000 a month on average compared to about $2,000 in terms of what South Sudanese get. The second analysis, which Niall and others conducted, was to focus on the petroleum sharing policy. You know that 2% and 3% are supposed to be allocated for states and communities that are producing oil. We did an analysis which showed clearly that the government owed $305 million to the communities and the states. And we made that a challenge, which brought on board the Council of State to say, look, executive, what are you doing? We need to make sure that the resources go to the communities and the states, because that's where oil is produced. And lastly, just a couple of examples, because we have published more than 100. So myself, I have focused on service delivery over the years. One of the papers that I wrote was to look at the allocations in terms of budget between the central government and the state governments, and found clearly that the central government was spending over 80% of what was allocated compared to what the states were getting. And that speaks to the challenge, policy challenge. And what that led to was that the minister concerned at the time got to have a discussion with the Minister of Finance to introduce what's called the need-based allocations, in which case, as opposed to allocating a lump sum of the same to all of the states, there was now a need to introduce differential allocations because states were not the same in terms of need. Number two, in 2018, I wrote another paper which looks at security of the country more generally, and used two sources of data to highlight public safety in terms of policy efforts in the security sector. One data source is called ACLED, and then the other data source was actually the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance provides data related to allocation for different entities of the government. And what I did was to really relate the two data sets and figure out whether or not South Sudanese are being safe as a result of spending in the security sector. And the results were providing the opposite, that in fact, more security sector spending is a nuisance for safety of the people of South Sudan. That paper was presented at a public meeting here in Juba, and it is also published in a journal. It's called the African Security Affairs Journal. And that was also a challenge, a policy challenge that we undertook. The point I'm trying to make is that people need to separate politics from policy. In terms of politics, we're not supposed to be involved in that, because that's not our job. But in terms of policy, we have actually been quite hard on the government and its partners.
Brilliant. Thanks for that answer, Augustino. The Institute was reportedly shut down recently. What happened, and how did you manage to get it reopened?
Yes, so the Institute was shut down on the 2nd of August. And it was a result of one of our colleagues joining an institution, or I would say an advocacy group called PCCA, Awolic in this case. And the government, but as you know, PCCA was calling for the government to basically resign. The government reacted by shutting down the Institute on 2 grounds based on our conversation with them. Ground number 1 is that somehow there was intelligence that the Institute was funded by different entities to topple the government, and that the Institute was also being used as a space to discuss some of these ideas. And so the government wanted to shut it down so it would investigate these two issues. And it did. So it did investigate the Institute. And it took a long while for them to get done. But eventually, after the investigation was done, there were quite a bit of hurdles in terms of reopening. And I would gladly say that those hurdles were addressed through diplomacy, and we were able to be reopened. We engaged different stakeholders in terms of the policy arena, the government, and also citizens who acted in support of the Institute to make our case. But what is clear is that there was no evidence of us being funded to topple the government. In fact, that's against the law of the country. It's also against the laws of the funders. If we were to be engaged in political activism, we would not get the funding. We are registered as a non-profit institution, which should not be engaged in politics. And quite clearly, as Abraham stated, whatever decision he made it for himself, not for the Institute. But it was not clear to the government whether to separate.
Are you fully reinstated now and you are free as before? As you are well aware, since the war in 2013, the space for freedom of speech has significantly. And now you are shut down or reopened. Are you able to reassure everyone that the Sudd Institute has exactly the same freedom and the same space to move, research, and report as previously?
Yeah, so let me emphasize this, Marwan. At first, the Institute was founded after an extensive consultation with different stakeholders, the public, the government, the international community. And during those discussions we had with different stakeholders, we made it clear that we were here to serve and to work with everybody. Over the years, that has served us well. Knowing that when we got established, we consulted with different components of the parliament. There was that trust built with them. Recall that the evaluation which resulted to the creation of the Institute was conducted in the office of the president. We have different individuals, different ministers who were made part, and directors who were made part of the process. And there was confidence as well as trust as a result of that consultation. And then you have other civil society institutions that work with us, which also speak to our intentions. Ebony Center is a good example, Law Society, and then you have international community, which works very closely with the government. So over the years, even though there have been difficulties, we have never faced what we faced in August. And as we have reopened, we haven't seen any element of intimidation or us being told to do one thing over the other. But clearly, yes, there has been a narrowing space for civic activity over the years, as you have emphasized. The Sudd Institute, to some degree, other than at times, individuals would be contacted by some individual officers who might not be happy with a particular publication to tell us off. But that I cannot say it is a government policy so far. And so we have done okay. So far, we don't see any threats coming our way. We'll continue to stay above politics because politics is not our job. We will continue to be critical in terms of policy. If the government doesn't like us being critical in terms of policy, then we have a way to address that. But so far, we haven't seen anything. We have had different government entities coming to us to say your job is required and we'll support you to do so. Council of State is one of them. Ministry of Finance is one of them. I have provided consultancy services for the Ministry of Finance over the years. And even at some point, we have done work for the presidency. The National Dialogue is one of those exercises which sort our expertise and our work so far in the country. So I would say we're not worried now. We're doing okay. And we should be doing okay moving forward.
And move for family reasons, as you mentioned earlier. And then subsequently, the loss of Abraham Awolic over the phenomenon or the issue of the PCCA. That's an incredible, that's a significant loss for any organization because of the expertise that people had. Have you been able to replace them or even more importantly, are you still able to coordinate or reach out to them for cooperation or consultation or advice?
Yes. So indeed, in any institution, you're going to have such changes happening, and there will be consequences for those changes. So Juk left not recently. Juk left the institute first in 2013, and then came back and then left again in 2018 when Abraham was appointed as the MD of the institute. But Juk has been a very critical member of the institute. If you go on our website, he has published widely on a variety of issues, including stabilization issues, peace and security in the country, gender, you name it. And so Juk was a critical member of the institute. So losing him, even though I still don't understand what that means, because Juk basically left at the time when there was no such crisis to attend to his family and to attend to his new job in New York. And since then, we have consulted him and was working on a consultancy basis. He recently indicated that he was not happy with the decision of the board to fire Abraham. And that probably led to him now saying he's not part of the institute. He has not told us that as the institute that he's not part of the institute. What we know is that he left the institute, and historically he has always been, and he will always be part of the institute. And so that's Juk's case. But then Abraham left recently, and he was the MD. He was also a good researcher of the institute. And so yes, he's being gone. It's cost institute. It's a big loss for the institute. But I must say this: we did not build the institute so then it largely depends on us and forever. And I want to say this because South Sudanese institutions are normally built around personality cult. The institute does not have that culture. The idea of the institute is that you bring the ideas together, you promote them through succession. And we never conceived of the idea that we'll be here forever. And as such, the transition of Abraham and Juk out, it's a healthy thing for any institution. And that we wish them the best of luck in their new endeavors, and also hope for them to wish the institute the best of luck in moving forward by recruiting new individuals. And we are doing that. Over the years, we have had training opportunities for young people, folks who would have skills in research, as a way to say, look, in the future, this place belongs to you. You can take over. And that succession plan is in place. I might go back to school in a year or so, and I would want somebody else to take over. Niall, for example, who has been here for a number of years, can take over. And then we have other recruits coming in. So even though there's a loss, the idea that the Institute should permanently depend on us is not progressive and is not healthy for the Institute. So yes, those guys have caused a loophole in the Institute, but also recognize that the Institute will move on when we're not here.
That's brilliant, Augustino. Yeah, you've come a long way. Where do you see the Institute moving now, and which direction do you think it should be heading to, especially looking to the future, the next 5-10 years, as South Sudan changes? What would be the continued role of the Institute?
Well, so our objective remains the same, and that is to continue to inform public policy and to provide training opportunities in order to improve the living standards of our people, or improve South Sudanese society. But how do we further that? Well, there are a variety of ways, some of which we have already undertaken. Number one is that we need to diversify into other areas of research. So far, we are limited to 2 major areas: governance, peace, and security. But we would also like to move towards looking at economic issues. We have left economic issues to Dr. Lowell. Dr. Lowell is getting older, he's retiring, and he works very closely with us. And his intention is that young people could actually take up after him. And we would like to fill that void when he's gone. So we'd like to diversify into that area. One of the areas that is also quite critical for policy making is improving data capacity of the country. As you might have heard, you have data being sporadically found across the board. They are not put in one place, and the quality of the data is very poor. In 2017, we had an idea to partner with universities in the West, spearheaded by Benjamin Achek Machar, you know him, in order to improve data capacity of the country. And we are still pursuing that objective so far. And Norway gave us money to establish the hub. And so we now have a server in place, but we'll be looking for money to hire 2 people, technical people, to get all the data from different agencies in the country, clean them, put them in one place. So when my one comes in to look for data, say on security-related issues, you're able to find that in one place. If James Illich is able to come in for economic-related issues, if Wani is able to come looking for peace-related stuff, you have the National Dialogue database, which has spoken to a lot of peace-related issues. So that's one item we would like to pursue. We would also like to mobilize resources and recruit more quality researchers. So far, I said we have 13 employees. The key researchers so far who are left on the job are 4. The rest are support staff. And so we want to get more researchers to focus on at the national level, at the state level, county level, and even the lowest subnational level possible, in order to unearth fundamental issues of governance and peace and security in the country. We are also trying to improve our content. We, as a human institution, we aspire to improve regularly. And our content can be improved in terms of editorial, in terms of rigor, you name it. And the best way to do that is hire good experts in their areas, or qualified experts in their areas, have the editors, have the reviewers across the board. So you're going to need resources to do that. But we also are quite intended to be a prominent institution, not just in South Sudan, but also regionally and international. Our ranking so far is top in the country, and we are one of the top 80 think tanks in Sub-Saharan Africa, which is a good fit so far. But so what else do you do in making sure those achievements are realized in 5 to 10 years? We're going to build more partnerships with local institutions, regional institutions, and international institutions, because our job cuts across the board. We inform local actors, but we also inform regional and international actors with respect to policy in South Sudan.
There's an idea that goes around regarding Africa in particular, the idea of elitism. So politics in Africa and in South Sudan as well are quite elitist. And even the languages we use are not the languages that are spoken by ordinary people. So most of what we do in politics, like news and things like that, hardly reaches our ordinary people who are the majority of our people. On top of that, the Sudd Institute is almost academic in its outlook. What are you prepared to do? What are you willing to do in order to reach ordinary people? Because at the end of the day, if all your endeavors and all these things that you are doing don't reach 70% of the South Sudanese, what's the point in doing it?
That's a good question. So we have, I'm glad you brought that up. We have been branded, even within the civil society setting, as an elitist institution. And that comes about as a result of not just the perception, the fact that we are pursuing high-level issues, but also as a result of the fact that we don't get to the lowest level possible in terms of influencing policy and changing lives. And our job hasn't been for us to just focus on these two levels. Our job has been that with resources made available for us, we can not only go to the lowest level possible, but also make sure that when we go to the lower levels possible, we are able to translate information we produce into local languages. And recently, the board sat and discussed the potential to translate some of our publications, especially key ones, into Arabic, because there are more South Sudanese, especially those who trained in the north, who are competent in Arabic, and they are not being reached with the information we produce. But knowing that majority of our population resides in the rural areas, that reaching out to them using translated information and also radio messaging would be key. And we conducted a study in 2017, 2018, which focused on the issues of peace. And one of the questions that we asked was, how are you getting information related to peace processes in Addis Ababa and Juba? And which medium would be appropriate for that information? And people came to us clearly saying the radio is the best way to go about this. And you recall that during the CPA implementation, thankfully, we were able to get resources to inform the general public. But what was key is that the USAID provided radios, even to families, which got the information translated to the local languages. And there was a great deal of coverage. There was a great deal of information being shared across the board. The citizens were greatly informed. And I remember going to my village in 2006 and found a USAID branded radio in the village. And people were listening to messages coming through in Dinka. The Institute aspires to do things like that if given resources. And we would like to go as far as partnering with local actors as well as international actors to further that objective. So we're not just being an elitist. We don't want to be an academic institution. And in fact, we're not an academic institution in that respect of, in terms of the things that we do. Even though we conduct research, our research is action-oriented. And academic research is normally about the questions related to things we don't know. And after that, we don't go further to say, okay, what do we use this information for that we generate after asking the question, and we are able to answer that question. Our work is to ask questions and to say, okay, now that we have the answer, where do we take the answer? Who uses this answer?
Brilliant, brilliant. Oh, thanks so much, so much, Ting. I'm going to ask you a final question, and maybe would like you to answer it on your individual capacity, not necessarily as a representative or spokesperson for the Sudd Institute. The country has gone through a terrible state during this last civil war since 2013. there are things that are coming, like a review of constitution. We are expecting elections in 2023. Would you agree with the notion that the country maybe is beginning to stabilize? Do you see a role for the institute in the drafting of the new constitution, at least in the discussion of the new institution and the direction of the country in the next period? So basically the question is, do you agree that the country is starting to stabilize, and are you optimistic about the near future and the role that the Sudd Institute may do in terms of the constitution, the new order that's going to come, and the discussion of that?
Yes. So the Institute, as I said earlier, focuses on stabilization agenda for the most part. And one of the things that we have looked at in terms of research over the years, and even an element of advocacy, Zakaria Dean was the key person who focused on constitutional related issues in the country. It is to make sure that there is institutional strengthening at that level, and to be able to produce a constitution that is agreed upon by all of the South Sudanese in the country in particular. And as I understand, the partners to the peace agreement understand that very well. And there has been a move to have a permanent constitution, a new constitution being worked on right now. And it underpins the importance of ruling the country by using institutional frameworks, the constitution being supreme. And so what does that say in terms of stabilization? Will there be stability? I think with the steps taken so far, there have been some accomplishments since the implementation of the agreement started. What is most seen now, the improvement is largely within the economic sector, with the PFM playing a huge role in trying to put in place instruments for managing resources of the country.
PFM being?
PFM. And Dr. Awolic is a key person in terms of another center, which plays a huge role in policy making in the country. He's advising the Ministry of Finance and Central Bank, and also working with international partners. There have been breakthroughs. You will recall that there was money coming in from the IMF to the country. That money was a product of the policy efforts being made by the Ministry of Finance and Central Bank in changing how we manage resources. But there are other components of
we have spoken to Dr. Lual, and in fact we are going to release that issue quite soon.
You spoke to him about. I interact with him, and I follow his work very closely, as he does with the Institute's work. So I'm glad you were able to talk to him about this. But the other components that are quite being worked on, I don't know if you have heard, the hybrid court formation. It's actually underway. It's being approved by the government, and there are partners working towards making that happen. Because without justice and accountability in the country, you basically can't speak with constitutionalism. You also need to focus on just general violence. There has been local level or subnational level violence over the years, but politically motivated violence has reduced tremendously. And I focus on this quite a bit because that's where my research is. If you look at available data, you will recall that in 2013, 2014, 2015, 16, 17, the IO, the government, and other stakeholders in the armed struggle were shooting at one another all over the place. That has tremendously reduced. So if you look at the number of episodes, violent episodes per month, you would compare that to 2018 and 2017, there's been a great deal of reduction. What that implies is that there is room for stabilization, especially if what's being done right now is sustained. I'm not saying that's a magic wand that you need. There is need for more things to be done, especially in the security sector, including making sure that the unified forces are graduated and sent to the field to stabilize security. But what I'm saying is that there is a semblance of effort in terms of stabilization. And so what does that say about elections? Elections are fundamental to political reforms and changes. And what is clear is that The government supports the idea of elections in 2023. That I know for a fact, because I've interacted with a bunch of key government officials who are saying they are willing to have the elections taking place. What I don't know is whether or not the opposition will be on board. And here's why. The opposition relies heavily on displaced folks as being in their camp. And we have not returned majority of these folks, both locally, those who are displaced internally, and those who are displaced to the foreign nations. The return of those guys, however, if it has to be pursued before elections, it's going to take more than 3 years. Our experience during the CPA speaks to that quite clearly, that you will not return over 2 million people in just a year before elections. You will not send them to the grassroots and have them registered for elections. And now, one more thing, in terms of registering people for elections, you need to create constituencies. And those constituencies are a product of what's called the census. South Sudan needs a census. There is something similar to that being conducted. I don't know whether the partners will abide by that so far, but the census is going to take over 2 years to have it conducted. And when that period is done, you will have run beyond 2023. So again, as you said, constitution making is a process that is guaranteed by the agreement. You have elections. It's a process that is also required by the agreement. But you will also have politics involved in terms of how you approach both. You will also have to involve logistical challenges, which will affect elections, beginning with the census conduct and redistricting of constituencies of the country, on which you would base the selection of parliamentarians. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does very comprehensively. Thank you very much, Augustino. And this brings us to the end of our interview, unless you have something to add.
No, thank you very much. What I really want to add is that we're back in business. And I want to echo the fact that the Institute belongs to all of us. South Sudanese, it's our institution. And as opposed to bringing it down, given the fact that it has actually been the top institution in terms of research and informing policy, we should promote it for the benefit of all. And I thank you all for listening to this or watching this and supporting the Institute over the years.
Thank you so
very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Augustino, and thanks for giving this opportunity to RBC-TV. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon, hopefully. Enjoy your Christmas.
Appreciate you once again. Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Okay. Merry Christmas. And happy
Merry Christmas.